All right, welcome to this is the first live event on the dynamics of neuroplasticity group. So we've got the LinkedIn group and the Facebook group. They're going concurrently. And today I'm kicking off a series, and I may do every other week on the series because I want to get some other messages out there, but I'll be going live each Thursday at 8 a.m. Pacific time. We have people from multiple continents, so there's not going to be a perfect time, but 8 o'clock Pacific time is it gets some people after the workday, some people in the middle of the workday. Uh, the point of this is to expand and accelerate adoption of neuroplasticity. When you look at neuroplasticity, you start doing a dive on what it means. You see that the definitions tend to be one, incremental, and two, they tend to be climbing back up to homeostasis, status quo, comfort zone, whatever, as opposed to the incremental versus transformational, or if they're more than incremental, they tend to be coming from below back up to uh, steady state, if you will. And what's interesting is very few people understand how to apply neuroplasticity. And part of it is because probably the way it's presented. Also, it's been in the science. I mean, it's still very, very new term in terms of cognitive processing. It's been in the labs for so long, the research labs for so long. What we're doing now, what I'm doing is getting it out there to coaches, leadership, life, executive. My focus is executive and leadership because that's where my skill set is, but it works for all coaches. So life coaches, health coaches, business coaches, et cetera, all that. Everybody's welcome because what we're doing is we're helping people make shifts. And without getting into the current landscape too deep, we know that change is happening more rapidly than ever. We know that there's more opportunities for stress than ever. And AI is helping that. I use AI all the time. I'm not a hater of AI, but I do think that people have to understand what it's good for, where its limits are. And I do a segment on productivity and what it actually means because we need to understand what we're using AI and what we think we mean by productivity. It's not equal across the board. My focus is transformation. There's plenty of books written about incremental. Very little is known about transformation because it's different for everybody. And what I'm doing with neuroplasticity is making it similar for everyone, or at least pulling out the parts that are similar for everyone. So you see this diagram here. Let me go back to this view. You'll see me using multiple, hold on. You'll see me using multiple media here, and it's because I like to do some illustrations on the pad, and especially when we have interaction. And by the way, I put in the chat, I'll do it again, the link that you can use to join me on stage. We can have a conversation. This is inside the group. The reason I'm doing it inside the dynamics of neuroplasticity group is to keep it more intimate. I don't have to do the opening. I'm not expecting people from all over the place to be watching it, and I can get right into the meat of it. So this is the step 3 in my 7-step reset, but it's a big part of it. And I first have to help people understand that we can change habits. Now, and when you look at emotional intelligence created in the mid 90s, the standard was that you can't change identity, you can't change intelligence, you can't change who you are, you can't change your reactivity and things like that. And it focused on regulation. So after the fact regulation, I look at regulation as an umbrella. You have prevention, you have modulation, and you have regulation. And regulation is more like corrective action. So that whole umbrella is regulation, prevention, modulation, correction. And what we want to do is move things forward. So you can see this first half, first of all, is pre-stimulus. And pre-stimulus is anything that's happening before. Keep in mind, this is based on thousands of stimulus reaction cycles per day. some of those become stimulus reaction response cycles, right? If you take 95% of everything we do is done by habit, then some of it will actually have a response, but a lot of it is unconscious. You get up, you brush your teeth, you floss your teeth, whatever. It's just, you're not really thinking about it consciously. You just have a rhythm that you go through, you're mindlessly doing other things. And so that would be stimulus reaction. And then response is when you're engaging the conscious mind. And you see, I have this line here. The earlier you can take active, excuse me, the earlier you can take action, the greater the impact and the lower the effort that it takes. If you wait too long, if you think about somebody who's crashing out, that's it. I like to look at extremes because then you could make sense of it. If you look at somebody who's crashing out, the amount of effort to get them from being crashed out is tremendous. Way better to avoid it. And the impact of your actions, your interventions, are almost nothing, right? You try to talk them off the edge. What does happen sometimes if a major thing interrupts their pattern? I've seen people crashing out, and then an important person in their life walks in the door and they just calm down. It's like, bam, that all of that is pointing to what we can do with neuroplasticity. So we know it's possible to go from crashing out to steady state. But the question is, how do we do it, and how do we do it on purpose? And that's what I'll be doing here. Where's my other? Hold on a second. One of the things with running 3 different media pieces is that you do have some latency, self-induced latency, but it'll get better. I usually just use 2. I usually don't use 3. All right. So I needed my manager. I needed my slide manager. That was not there. All right, perfect. So what we've got is, let's go back to the beginning. And if I look at neuroplasticity, the way I'm using it now, I use the word applied neuroplasticity because we're actually doing something with it on purpose. Like I said, the definitions, if you look at the definitions, one level of definitions is very passive. The brain adapts, right? Everybody gets it. The brain adapts and it adjusts. And then the second level of neuroplasticity is what you see more in the clinics, physical therapists, et cetera, where they're bringing people back up to homeostasis because of injuries and what have you. The way I use neuroplasticity is it's actually allostatic neuroplasticity. So if you think about generic neuroplasticity, it's like homeostasis neuroplasticity. So stability at status quo. And that status quo might be slightly upward trajectory, slightly upward. What I'm talking about is allostatic neuroplasticity, which is this nice, steep, relatively stabilized trajectory. And so there you go. Use neuroplasticity on purpose to install stability under load, not just new skills, but new defaults. When I talk about under load, if you think about, first of all, I do some analogies with sports. And the reason is because people already use neuroplasticity. They just don't realize they're using it. And they already use it for allostatic capacity increase. If you take a basketball player working on a particular move, they drill that move over and over and over. If they're, and what they're doing is the neural pathway is already created. It's already activated, but what they're doing is strengthening that neural pathway. Now, when that basketball player stops playing, those neural pathways go dormant because the synapses leaves. The myelination that made them strong stays. So that's why we have the activate, because at the beginning of the next season, they get in there, start doing the warm-ups, they do some exercises, they're waking up those activities. The same way if you ski or snowboard, something like that, the beginning of the season, the first day or two, you may feel awkward. It's just that the neural pathways are dormant. Same thing if you stop exercising for a while, you go back in, you feel awkward the first day, but it comes back the second day. It's not a muscle issue, it's a nervous system issue. And neuroplasticity happens very fast. That's when physical therapists are telling you we want to activate the stabilizer muscles. What they're talking about is activating the neural pathways that drive those muscles, and then creating neural pathways. In athletics, we don't see this happening, but we do have to use this in cognitive processing. The creating and building new neural pathways, and it comes into play with leadership. So back to the sports analogy, if you take a basketball player and they have an X shooting percentage, so call it 60, 70% shooting percentage. But under pressure, when the game's on the line, their shooting percentage drops to 40%. We don't say that player forgot how to play. We don't say that player needs to learn how to shoot. We know they know how to shoot. What we say is we need to work on them with pressure. So we create pressure. We do drills that have pressure. You put your hand in the face and they have to make the shots. You have 2 and 3 people triple teaming them, double and triple teaming them, make the shots. We're drilling, and what we're doing is we're creating new neural pathways that are there to function under pressure. And when it comes to functioning under pressure, to put this in perspective, what I'm talking about, let's say that you have, I already talked about the pre-stimulus, right? So you're moving along on a normal day and you have these little blips, you have things happen, somebody cuts you off in traffic, you have a blip, somebody, gives you the finger, you have a blip. You think about something that you forgot to do, you have a blip. And that's just normal, right? You're going along. When you have stability under pressure, those blips, first of all, some of them don't even show up. And the ones that do, they're small and they go back quickly. So when you look at an athlete who performs very well under pressure, they look more like this. And the athlete who doesn't do well under pressure, let's call it the leader who doesn't do well under pressure, it could look like they get the blip, but they don't really recover. And then they're going along and then they get another blip and then they don't really recover. And then the next stimulus comes and now they're up here when their calm, collected mode is way down here. This is what we're fixing. We are going from this to this. And it's still possible to have one of these, but we want to recover very quickly. And when I talk about very quickly, we're talking about milliseconds, not seconds. And there's a lot written about mindset, growth mindset, fixed mindset. And people will have a growth mindset, but what they don't realize is when this happens, when they get this going on, their coherence is getting reduced. So if they have this much coherence, it gets reduced to something less. And that's, you could look into HRV and things like that. But when that coherence goes down, you have more rigidity and more chaos. Chaos looks like crashing out at the extreme. Rigidity looks like a total fixed mindset. People just, I can't do it. No, nothing's going to work at the extreme. But those are extremes. There's a process that it moves towards that. It goes from okay to not okay, but it's incremental. And when we talk about doing this, it's about maintaining that chaos, that coherence in spite of pressure. And that's where we apply neuroplasticity. So back to this slide, that leader may have the skills. They may know how to rephrase. They may know public speaking. They may know how to question. They may know how to respond. But they may not have neural pathways that get them back on track very quickly. That's what we can build with neuroplasticity to get back on track. So I said I was going to unpack a few things like goal setting, affirmations, visualization, and why they work. First of all, I don't talk much about incremental. I don't think that's where we need to be spending our time as coaches, because incremental work can be done without help to a degree. transformational work needs help because the system that you have to change is also the system that's judging whether or not this is making sense. And when you set a goal, you're creating context for many, many things that are necessary. One, the goals communicate to the reticular activating system. And I don't talk much about brain parts. I do use the RAS because it's a core part of the goal setting, but I stay away from the parts of the brain because there's nothing you can do. You can't like activate the RAS or not activate the amygdala, right? It's just, so we use frameworks and models to make it work. But when you are setting goals, you are creating some changes in the network of neurons. And what this model is, we have the network of neurons, this is side A, and we have the conscious mind, which is side B. So this is not a mind, this is your network of neurons. There's neural pathways made up of neurons with synapses connecting them, and they get stronger with more myelin. When they go dormant, the myelin stays. It does degrade with age some, but the myelin stays, but the synapse goes over to other neural pathways that are active and needed. That's process of synaptogenesis. It's like pruning. This is the present moment. So in between, there's a transition. So I use this image to show how this is that reaction formation zone. So this is all signal. This is all conscious mind. What's happening in between this crossover is the network of neurons is converting the signal into something that can be perceived by the conscious mind. And the wider we can make this zone, the more we are in the present moment. This is what I call the present moment. So when I look at the 7-step reset, step 1 is the knowledge. You have to understand beliefs, habits, priming, mindset, physiology, and all of that to have the allostatic capacity or the allostatic lift. But you're not going to learn it all at once. And a lot of it is by doing. And the more you do with physiology, the easier it is to change habits. The more you do with mindset, the easier it is to remove limiting beliefs. The more you do with priming, the more you can use physiology. They all work interchangeably. And that's why I use a circle. One breaks down, it's going to become a weak link. The others will carry it for a bit, but we want to keep expanding those. Then this is the coherence. This is what I described. After that, step 2 is we want to have coherence all the time. Yes, all the time. Why? Because using this diagram here, in sports, there's an opponent in your face all the time trying to stop every play. In leadership, there's not. So these blips that we get, these threats, our system is treating them like a tiger on the Serengeti. We don't face tigers, right? Most of us don't face tigers. So it's like, why do we need all that cortisol and adrenaline going all the time? And what we use neuroplasticity to rewrite that conditioning. Literally, we rewrite the conditioning, and that's step 3. We rewrite it so that you have 7 phases of this process. So I take the 1 second, I call it the 1 second model, and we break it into 7 phases. And it starts with a 1/10 of a second before the stimulus, because there's a pre-listening. The brain is always predicting what might happen, what may occur. You walk into a room, you see who's there, you automatically shift in thinking about this is going to be a supportive group or not supportive group. The brain is always predicting. And then we have the already listening, and sometimes it hurts us, right? Because it's threat biased and it's making up things in your mind that aren't going to happen. Then we have initial detection. This is still well outside of our realm of understanding. By the time it hits rapid appraisal and reaction formation, we definitely can feel the sensation. The challenge is this side works with words and this side works with signal. And so you don't have a direct communication. And the inner work is understanding how to interpret what's going on over here. And it's not a big ask, because leaders and coaches already do it. It's called sensory acuity. We know that if you're talking to somebody and you see them flush a little bit, or maybe a twitch, or maybe you see them rock back or squint, whenever you see something, you don't know what it means, but you know, hey, I better check in here and see if I need to, hey, let me check in. Let's this is a good place to see if there's any questions, whatever it is that you're going to do there to surface that. And we even condition that in, because that's happening here. Now, I'll give you an example. You open an email, and whatever it is, it just added another 2 days of work to you, because what you thought you were done with, they're right off the bat to say, this is not what I asked for, right? And now you're all of a sudden, and you get that feeling, right? Wherever it is, it might be in your upper chest, lower chest, it's probably in your torso, but it's somewhere. That feeling is here. Now, if you have a feeling that's here, that means the conscious mind, the programmer, can use neuroplasticity to rewrite or rewire what's going on. So instead of it being a threat bias, we change it to a neutrality bias, neutral bias. So everything is not seen as a threat. That's a training that's beyond the scope of here, but it's an exercise that takes about 6 weeks, just a few minutes a day, but you have to train it. You're literally training. That's neuroplasticity. You're training the network of neurons. You're getting it rewired. And then in rapid appraisal, it's more available. So here, you have to learn to be sensitive enough to pick it up the same way some leaders can pick up the facial expression changes and others cannot. You train yourself, but if you train yourself, you start picking it up. Police officers are trained. They're constantly looking for those little signals. That's what they use in the interrogation, right? They're able to read the signals, and they kind of tells them where to pay attention to. By the time it hits rapid appraisal, it's more aware. Now, for the neuroscientists and the academics in the group or watching this, I understand that it's not this clean, but to describe it the way it really is, we would get into science speak and parts of the brain, and that's where we lose people. One of the reasons why it's not easy to apply neuroplasticity is because it's about the amygdala, the hippocampus, the basal ganglia, all these different things, and the feedback loops and all this stuff, and there's names for them. When the reality is, yes, it is not this tidy, and it's not always a second. A person in a phobia response, this 1 second will get collapsed to a quarter of a second. These 7 phases, it skips the conscious mind side. It's just boom, 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 boom. In a phobia, somebody crashing out. They're never getting to respond. They're reaction to reaction to reaction to reaction. So I get it that it's different than this. It's not clean. But if you don't understand it at this level, you're not going to understand it at the more complex scientific level. What I'm doing is simplicity on the other side of complexity. And I'm going to be shutting down soon. I see somebody joined in the chat. You can click that link. I'll stop the formal presentation part, and then we can have some conversation about any of this. Now, the next part of this is we go into the preconscious surfacing. So that's that transition. That's this, where we're going from the network of neurons side into the transition where it's converting to to something that can be perceived as thought, because thought is energy. The network of neurons, energy is pulsing through there, but it's different forms, and so that's why it's not easily translatable. And that's what we're doing in this group. Oops, so here, so that's the step 3. Step 4, I'll go to the next page, make them a little bigger. Step 4 is, that's supposed to say response right there. Okay, I have an old slide. Let's see what this one says. Yeah, this one is correct. I didn't correct the other slide. All right, so step 4 is response, right? So you have step 1, your knowledge and understanding. Step 2 is make sure we are in a good state of being. This happens thousands of times a day. So we have to get good at this coherence, because if you're not good at coherence, you're already pre-triggered into step 3. And on that topic, this little thing here, this 10th of a second pre-listening, we can fix that by conditioning in a different perpetual question. So every time I say condition in, we're talking about neuroplasticity. And I'll use that terminology often. And we'll get into how do you condition it in. But here's your response. And this is, you typically hear this as stimulus response. I talk about it as stimulus reaction response. And the reason I break it up like that is because we don't want the response to equally reaction. Stimulus reaction response, because there's a bright line between the two. And the unconscious ones, like I said, getting up, brushing your teeth, making coffee, whatever, there's some stimulus reactions, but you may not even remember doing it. It's like driving on the highway and you drive past your exit and you don't remember it. You had stimulus reaction. It wasn't a conscious thought for the response. And it makes sense. If we are 95% of our lives are run by habit, then it makes sense that most of those are not going to rise to the level of conscious mind. And then step 5 is an optional. This is emotional modulation, because we do not want to go to action if we're triggered. Emotional modulation is a step we do. It can take 2 seconds, but we want to get it done in under 90 seconds. And this stops that crashing out from happening. This stops this from happening, because we're getting back to coherence in real time with the response. This is happening in seconds, because you don't want to do this. You want to go through the whole day like this. And then we have step 6 is action. Essentially, do it, delay it, delegate it, dump it. And the reason I'm talking about it like this, if this is happening tens of thousands of times a day, whatever you're deciding, you're either going to think about it right now and address it, or you're just going to delay it. You make a note on your pad and you move on and you do something with it later. Or you have a conversation with somebody. You set a meeting with somebody. That might be an action that you take. And then step 7 is return to mindfulness. So we got to get back to mindfulness, because we have another one of these coming in another second or two. If this is happening 30,000 times a day, we're awake about 65,000 seconds. You can see what's going on. So that is the model, and where goal setting comes into play is you have to have context for the inner work. You have to have context for taking action. You have to have context for the rituals, whatever it is. So the goal gives us our North Star, where we're going. It does a few things for us. One, it gives us our zone of what we care about, right? This is what we care about, circle of concern and circle of influence. And it also gives us what we're not going to deal with, right? We're not doing this. So goal setting gives us that, but it also gives us something else. Goal setting informs things like affirmations, mental rehearsal, meditation, because I think meditation is not just about getting calm. It's about using meditation as implementation intention, so that you can do the behaviors that you want. And there's more, but let's just stop here, because I said I would unpack these. Now, all of these influence parts of this model. The goal setting gives you context for neurotransmitter production, activating neural pathways. Like I said, it also activates the filtering of the reticular activating system, so you see things that you wouldn't have otherwise seen if you didn't set the goal. And when you have affirmations, that helps with the pre-listening. But I would say the perpetual question does a lot more, because challenge is, if you're not in a state of coherence, the affirmations are not going to work very well. Because if you're not in a state of coherence, you have more chaos and more rigidity. And when you have that, the thing, you're not in a position where you're nervous system is going to be optimized. And then you have visualization, mental rehearsal. We can use that to influence this. Now, you've heard the studies about about the free throw practicing free throws for real and practicing free throws in their mind, and the group that did it in the mind. And it's also with piano, it's skiing, all these things. The ones that did it in their mind, they improved almost as much as the other. Now, that's a certain kind of visualization. There's an outcome that you're visualizing. But as I said, we're talking about transformation. How do you visualize when you're doing transformation? That's different because there is nothing. You don't have something to hang it on. You don't know what that transformation is going to be. Anybody who's done major goals knows that the end state is different from what you imagined because you're learning as you go, you're changing, you're adjusting. And how do you visualize that? That's a different kind of mental rehearsal. And so what we do is the mental rehearsal is for the future, but that's focusing more like on priming. And remember, that's what we said here. That's more in the priming. And it helps inform identity. And the identity is what we can adjust by changing habits, because identity is a construct. Personality is a construct. Remember, I said emotional intelligence said we can't change our identity, but you can change the elements. And that identity, that construct is made up of your level of reactivity, what you care about, what you don't care about, your preferences, what you're not going to do. All of that goes into your personality and identity. And we can change those elements with neuroplasticity. The challenge is people try to change it from the construct level, which you can't do. You have to change it from the elements level. And having a goal gives you context for why you're going to do that. But when it's transformational, we need more than a goal. We need something that's more like a purpose, a vision, something that's bigger than themselves, because the inner work is not that much harder than the incremental improvement, but it's scarier because you're in the unfamiliar. And that's where I'll pick up next week. I'll get into the unfamiliar part of this because when people talk about, should I tell people what my goal is or should I not tell people what my goal is? It gets down to some of these factors are happening in here. Right? You're getting triggered. Some people get pressure because they tell other people and then they get destabilized and then they collapse. But I'll talk about the unfamiliar aspect of this next Thursday in the context of setting goals. All right. I will leave this up in the group as a post, and we will pick up next week, 8:00. And I will look at comments throughout the week. So if you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in. I'll respond in the post, and I'll also address next week on Thursday. All right. Take care.